Hi, everyone. I'm Bianca Goladriga, and this is Yahoo News Live. Well, Donald Trump says he's not going quietly into that good night. The Republican frontrunner has seen his poll numbers take a hit as summer has turned to fall. And on Sunday, he told NBC's Chuck Todd that he'd quit the race for the White House if his poll numbers bottomed out. Take a look.
A lot of people have asked me that question. Number one, I'm not a masochist. And if I was dropping in the polls where I saw that I wasn't going to win, why would I continue? And it's funny, maybe it's like not like me because it's the power of positive thinking. I'm a very positive person. I'm a positive thinker. But the truth is, I'm a realist. I'm doing great in the polls right now. I think you will say. I'm not saying anything. I'm leading everything.
You're
right?
leading every poll.
Well, today Trump told CNN's Chris Cuomo not to read anything into that answer because he's not going anywhere just yet.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm leading every poll, and I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna make our country great again. I'm not getting out. I'm gonna win. Okay. The answer is I'm going all the way, and we're gonna win.
Well, joining me now is Eric Erickson, editor-in-chief of Red State, for now at least, and we'll have more on that development later on in this interview. But Eric, I want to begin by talking about what you said the last time you were on our show. You said that Trump would take a big hit after his comments about Megyn Kelly. Nothing he said thus far, as outrageous as it has been, has seemed to have taken him out of the lead. So what's not to say that he won't go all the way?
Well, I think if you look at the Real Clear Politics polling average, for example, he has fallen pretty dramatically. Carly Fiorina and Ben Carson have both shot up. There's some new polling out of Iowa earlier today, some internal polling that shows that Trump is possibly no longer in the lead there. So I think Donald Trump has met his ceiling as more and more candidates drop out of the race, whether it's Rick Perry, Scott Walker, or candidates after the next debate. I think you'll probably...
Go ahead. We're just running B-roll. We can hear you.
So I think that we probably will see Donald Trump continue to decline.
You also said in the past that Donald Trump should be treated as a front runner and not just dismissed or made fun of as others in the Republican establishment have. Do you see the press and his opponents, have they started to do that, and have they started to take him more seriously?
I think his opponents have, for sure. I don't actually think the press has. I mean, when the CNN, I was actually at lunch with a friend who wanted to know what CNN's infatuation with Donald Trump is. I don't think it's a coincidence that even now in the polling averages, the candidates who are doing the best also happen to be the candidates getting the most press coverage. Donald Trump, Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson have gotten more press mentions in the past month and a half than the other candidates, and they happen to be doing very well. But there haven't really been any press probings into Donald Trump's business record, into his prior politics and prior positions. The candidates are starting to do that. I've been getting, actually, as a matter of fact, yesterday, I got my first anonymous Oppo research dump on Donald Trump.
And I know, though, I dispute that. I know that there have been journalists who've been digging in his past, who've come forward and talked about what they found and the discrepancies in his business deals in the past as well. But isn't this sort of a chicken and egg kind of situation? I mean, the press wouldn't be covering him if he weren't leading in the polls.
Actually, you know, I used to think that. But if you go back to June, July, before Donald Trump really even announced he was getting in, the press speculation was overwhelming on Donald Trump. And actually, the press coverage of Donald Trump led his rise in the polls instead of coming after his rise in the polls. And I really think it had a lot to do with it. I used to be very skeptical of people, for example, who would call my radio show and say, if only you talked about this candidate more, they would be doing better. And I'm beginning to believe, in fact, yes, the more the press talks about a candidate, the better they will do in the polls.
Yes, I guess you believe in the power of the media. You say that you don't believe Donald Trump is a true conservative, correct?
Right.
Yeah, you seem to be aligned on at least a few issues, specifically gun control. And here's what Donald Trump had to say about guns and the Oregon shooting at a campaign stop in Franklin, Tennessee.
The Second Amendment to our Constitution is clear. Now, this is in light of what's gone on with Oregon. You know, every time something happens, they don't blame mental illness, that our mental health care is out of whack, and all of the other problems. And by the way, it was a gun-free zone. I will tell you, if you had a couple of the teachers or somebody with guns in that room, you would have been a hell of a lot better off.
So, Eric, let me ask you, do you believe that we live in a country where teachers and students should be prepared to arm themselves and be responsible for defending themselves when they're sitting in a classroom?
I think more and more, if a teacher has a concealed carry permit and wants to carry in school, I'm not sure why we shouldn't allow a law-abiding citizen with a concealed carry permit to do it. I would point out, though, that that's a statement from Donald Trump is Donald Trump 2015. Donald Trump prior to 2015 wasn't singing the same song.
Oh, so you're saying that he's now playing along party lines because he thinks that's what voters want to hear?
Yes.
You also spoke out on the shooting, specifically President Obama's reaction to it. You called him a jackass after he called for tougher gun legislation. You seem to think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is more of a religious issue. Is that true, and why?
Well, I think that when you see Barack Obama, not Donald Trump, in the chat.
First time I think those two have been confused for one another.
When you see President Obama in the Chattanooga situation, when you see President Obama in the Charlotte, North Carolina shooting situation with the Muslim family, his conversations to the American public were not on gun control. They were on religious tolerance. Before the president spoke at 6:20 p.m. last Thursday, the Associated Press had confirmed that, in fact, the killer was asking people to state their religion. I think had the shooter or the victims been Muslim, the president would have given a speech on religious tolerance, as he did after Chattanooga, after Charlotte, after several of the others. But here he decided to go straight into gun control. In 1,299 words, he neither condemned the shooting nor mentioned religious tolerance. And I think had Muslims been involved, he would have. So
you really think, in your heart of hearts, that the president would have had a completely different speech, a completely different tone, if that we hadn't heard that the shooter, in fact, asked the victims what religion they were? Because we also heard that despite whatever they said their religions were, they still were shot arbitrarily. Yes, I absolutely do. I think that his pattern and practice in prior shootings from Chattanooga to Charlotte, when we know there was a religious component or an Islamic radical doing the shooting, that yes, the president brought up religious tolerance. We knew an hour before the president spoke that religion was in play in Oregon, and he didn't mention that. He went straight to gun control. Now, he would have gone to gun control anyway, but the fact he didn't mention it at all, I think he would have had it not just been Christians being shot. President Obama has said time and time again that he is a Christian. Do you believe him? Do you take his word when he says he's a Christian? Oh, I don't know the president's heart. A lot of people say they're Christians, particularly in the South. It's a cultural thing, but the president as well on the campaign trail. If he is a Christian, and I don't think he's really been meaningfully one. Meantime, Hillary Clinton has taken a stance on tougher gun regulations following the Oregon shooting. In fact, the majority of Democrats and Republican voters do support background checks. Gun legislation, as we know, is seen as a no-no for elections, do not touch topic. But do you think, seeing as Hillary Clinton is doubling down on it right now, will this time around be different? I think it'll be fantastic for Republicans. I think most of the people who call for background checks have never actually tried to buy a gun, because every time I've bought a gun in multiple states, I've had a background check. In fact, I don't know anyone who hasn't bought a gun who hasn't had a background check. The only exception to background checks is a private seller to a private buyer within the same state, one gun at a time. So a lot of the proposals that the Democrats are calling for are things that already are law. But when they mention Australia and Great Britain and their common sense gun reform, the common sense gun reform in both of those nations was actually confiscating guns. Now, President Obama and Hillary Clinton aren't going to say that on the campaign trail, but those are the gun reforms that Australia and Great Britain implemented. Well, Hillary Clinton did call for a new organization, aside from just the NRA, for gun owners who take guns and go shooting with them and do support the Second Amendment can start their own association, not necessarily have to align themselves with the NRA. Do you have any problems with that? There actually is a more liberal gun owners association other than the National Rifle Association that supports curtailing gun rights and getting rid of the so-called gun show loophole and stuff. The fact that Hillary Clinton doesn't even know that that group exists is probably an indicator of how effective that group is. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, I'd like to stay on this topic for another question because, as you know, she has a new ad out focusing on the upcoming Benghazi hearings. How big of a game changer, or I should say a blow, for the Republicans were Kevin McCarthy's comments?
Oh, I think it was huge. And in fact, I think it's hurt Kevin McCarthy and opened the door for a guy like Jason Chaffetz to run against him for speaker. Knowing the people who were involved in that hearing, Trey Gowdy in particular, they're really angry with Kevin McCarthy because they don't think that that's what it's about. But that Kevin McCarthy has gone out there and said it totally gives Hillary Clinton a campaign commercial out of it. I've had a number of friends of mine who served with Kevin McCarthy in the California legislature, and they all had a very similar story that when they would be flying back and forth from Southern California to Sacramento, they would be reading white papers and legislation, and Kevin McCarthy would be reading People Magazine and Us Weekly, thinking that was more important to stay in touch with pop culture, among other things. And I think at some point that catches up to you when you need to get into a substantive job like Speaker of the House.
Well, he clearly is facing more vulnerability now following those comments, which is probably why John Boehner has delayed the vote. You mentioned Jason Chaffetz. And given what you just said, I think I know the answer, but who would you vote for? Who would you support for the speaker's job now?
I'm not sure I've made up my mind yet. I don't really see anyone that's super compelling. To be honest, I would probably rather McCarthy than Chaffetz, just because Chaffetz has ridden his street cred of being on Fox News regularly saying that he knows conservatives. And I'm afraid he would get into a situation like John Boehner, who definitely was more conservative than Kevin McCarthy, but his problem became that he knew he was a conservative, therefore he didn't have to listen to conservatives. I think Chaffetz would go that way. To Kevin McCarthy's credit, he knows he's not a conservative and so would give them a seat at the table. I'm just not convinced that either man right now is the right guy for the job.
So if I'm reading this correctly, you're more concerned with who actually comes across as a true conservative versus what they're actually well read in on versus, reading, as you just said, People Magazine from briefings?
Well, I think what I'm saying is that I would rather have someone who's going to be willing to give conservatives a seat at the table than think that they already know the conservative position and therefore don't have to listen to a guy like Jim Jordan.
Well, your seal of approval for a lot of your fans and listeners is very important. But of course, as we know, the seal of approval won't be coming from the red state much longer. Why are you leaving and what are your next plans?
Well, there are a number of reasons for leaving. I've been thinking about it for a couple of years now. And this past June, I told Salem Media, which is our parent company, that it was time to leave. Back in 2006, some friends of mine and I who were running Red State, we sold it to a group called Eagle Publishing that's been bought by Salem. But I now have a radio show on the largest talk station in the country, WSB out of Atlanta, which is a competing radio company. I can't do a lot of radio with Salem Media because of my radio show. And then I can't really integrate my radio show into Red State. So they both want me to have a website. At this point, it finally makes sense for me to probably leave Red State and build a new project that's more integrated into my radio show. So I'm not really going anywhere other than to a new site.
I guess you're saying that you can't wear that many hats, right?
Yeah, at some point, I really do just want one wife and my two kids and not Red State as a second wife and a third.
I think your wife would probably agree with you on that one. But thank you so much for joining us, Eric. Best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
And we always look forward to hearing what you have to say. So use hashtag Yahoo Live and let us know what you think about the latest on Trump's never-ending run for the White House.